I thought it would be fun to practice solving some LeetCode JavaScript interview questions together. I've picked out a few common ones for us to work on. Let's take a look at them and tackle them step by step. This video is beginner friendly so anyone can follow along. After this video, you will be able to solve interview questions with ease and have a solid logic. In this video, we build and improve the logic behind the JavaScript interview questions. You can find all these questions on leetcode.com. So let's get started with the first question. You are given two strings, ransom note and magazine. Return true if a ransom note can be constructed by using a letter from magazine, and return false otherwise. Each letter in magazine can be used once in ransom note. Let me explain this question. For example, we pass two strings to the function ransom note and magazine. So in the question of whether ransom note can be constructed using letters from magazine, we must return true, otherwise return false. Each letter from a magazine can only be used once in the ransom note. To solve this problem, we can use a frequency count approach. We will create an object to store frequency of each letter in the magazine string, and then iterate through the ransom note string to check if we can construct it using letters from magazine. So let's take a look at how to do this. I already have here a JavaScript environment where I'm going to run all the JavaScript, and here is the browser console. Inside the JavaScript file, we first create a function, and I'm going to name this function can construct. That's upon you. You can specify any name to this function. And here we pass two parameters. First is ransom note, and second is magazine. And here we are going to create an object to keep track of all characters in the magazine. So I'm going to create here a comment and say keep track of magazine. So we create here a constant object with the name magazine frequency is equal to, and then specify an empty object here. So inside this object, we are going to store the frequency of the magazine characters. Now let's create a loop to check the frequency of the characters in this magazine variable. So for that, here I'm going to create a for loop. So for let characters of magazine, and inside this for loop, I'm simply going to console.log character. Now if you execute this function, you're going to get all the characters inside a console. So if I call this can construct right here, and if I pass two arguments here, so suppose if I say here, so for the first parameter, here we pass an argument and double A, and then for the second parameter right here, we pass an argument double A B. Now we have to find out that the magazine means the second argument can be constructed with the ransom note. If it is true, then return true inside a console. Now if I save the changes, then you will notice here we have A two times and B only once, because we have A two times and then we have B alphabet inside this console. Now we have to find out how many characters we have inside this magazine. To count that, inside this for loop, here I'm simply going to store all these characters inside this variable. So here I'm going to say magazine frequency of characters. So on each key of this magazine, we are going to store magazine character number. So here I'm going to say magazine frequency of character, and we are going to add 1 every time when we add a new character inside this frequency. So we pass here plus 1, just like this. But if we don't have anything, we're going to pass 0. So I'm going to grab this, put that inside a parenthesis, and say if we don't have anything here, then we return 0, a fallback value, just like this. And now I'm going to pass a semicolon here, and if I try to console.log this magazine frequency variable, if I save the changes, then you will notice here we have A 2 times and B only 1. So we have A 2 times and B only once. So we are going to count the frequency of the alphabet and store that inside an object. So once we know that how many characters we have inside this magazine, we can then iterate through ransom note and check whether the ransom note can be constructed with magazine. So I'm going to get rid of this console.log. So here I'm going to say for let char of ransom node, and inside this for loop, just for now, I'm going to console.log the characters. Let me save those changes, and here we have 2a. Because we have 2a inside this ransom node, we get 2a. Now what if I say here maximum frequency of characters? So we're going to pass this key to this maximum frequency and print it. So when I save the changes, we're going to have 2 as a response. So now if we have a character, we decrement the frequency of that character in maximum frequency. This is because we increase the frequency of the character in the maxin word. So in order to check the frequency of the character in ransom node, we need to decrease it. So here I'm going to pass minus sign. When I save the changes, I'm going to have 2 and 1. Put that right down here, just like this. And if I say here, if I don't have maximum frequency character, then return false. If I don't have anything inside this key of maximum frequency, then return false. Otherwise, decrease the value of maximum frequency to check the frequency of the character. We are also going to check if the maximum is equal to 0. Then we return false. This means we don't have a character in the word. So here we also going to check. We call here or and say if the maximum of character, if it is equal to 0, then return false also. Now if we print this, if I try to print right here, if I console.log maximum frequency, save the changes, then I'm going to get here A0. Means I'm going to minus values of maximum frequency from this A key. Now we can return true because we have checked the frequency of the number and now the A has become 0. So we can simply get rid of this console.log and say here return true, just like this. So now if I console.log this function, then I'm going to have a true as a response, because if I try to construct the entire ransom node using this maxin word, then I can easily do that. That is why we return true here. Now let's suppose that we are not able to construct random node with maxin. Let's suppose that we have here A and B. In that case, we need to have a false output from this function. When I save the changes, you can see we have a false as a response because we can't construct ransom node with maxin word. So now you can test any different possibilities with this function. So I'm going to put some console.logs here with their outputs. When I save the changes, you're going to get the result what you want. Now let's tackle the next question. Given an integer array number, move all zeros to the end of it while maintaining the relative order of the non-zero element. So we also have a note here that you must do this in place without making a copy of array. Let me explain this question first. So suppose we have an array, then we have to filter zeros and shift all the zeros at the end of the array without changing the array size and the relative order of non-zero element. So it means on the 0 index, we need to have 1. On the second index, we need to have 3. On the third index, we need to have 12. And at the end of the array, we need to have a 0 element. So this is what the output should look like. Let's see how we can do this. Main idea to solve this problem is to move all the 0 at the end of the array. So we create a function move all zeros at the end of the array while maintaining the relative order of the non-zero element. So inside the JavaScript file, we create a function move zeros and we specify here an array. So we pass here a parameter number. Then we create here a variable called let non-zero index is equal to 0. We are going to create here a loop. The first loop iterates through the array and moves all non-zero element to the front of the array, maintaining their relative order. So for that, let's create here a first pass loop. So this loop is going to move all zeros at the end. So we say here for let I is equal to 0. Then we say I is less than numbers of length and then we say I plus plus. We increase the value of the I variable. So we are going to stop this for loop when I is less than the length of this array. Let me first console.log numbers of I just for now. So let's create a variable here. Let numbers 1 is equal to, and then specify here an array just like this. And then let me call this move 0 right down here and pass this variable as an argument. Now when I save the changes, I'm going to have all the elements inside the console. Now what I have to do is I have to check the non-zero element using this for loop. So here I can say if the number of I, this number of I have all these elements, and then I'm going to say here if the number of I is not equal to 0, then execute this if block. And then here I'm simply going to call a console.log with some text. So I'm going to say here moving number of I to index non-zero indexed. So I'm going to print this variable. So let me save the changes and show you the result. So you can see moving 1 to index 0, moving 3 to index 0, and moving 12 to index 0. So we just successfully filter all the non-zero values. So if I just print this number, then you will notice we filter all the non-zero values using this if statement. We store all the element at 0 index. So let's store them in order. Now if you notice, using this statement, we can store all the elements at 0 index. Now all the elements store at 0 index. So let's store them in order. So to store all the elements in order, we have to increase the value of this variable, this non-zero index variable. So if I increase this value with incremental operator, just like this, if I add here plus plus sign, save the changes, then you will notice here 1 is going to store on index 0, 3 is going to store on index 1, and 12 is going to store on the index 2. So we can now successfully store all these index in their order. So instead of this console.log, now we can say number of non-zero index plus plus is equal to numbers of I. So we are going to store the number of I value inside this array on different index, on 0, 1, and 2 index. Now once we've done that, next we just need to store 0 at the end of the array. Just keep in mind that we have to pass a 0 at the end with exact array length. So to do that, we need to create here a second pass. We create here a second pass to fill the rest with zeros. So we create here a for loop. Let I is equal to 0. Then we say here I is less than the numbers of length, and then we increase the value of the I variable, just like this. And if I console.log here numbers, then I'm going to have my array inside a console. If I see here numbers of I, we don't have any zeros here. This is because we filter all the zeros using this for loop. After this 12, I want to store here 0 and 0. Instead of starting this I right from 0, we are going to start that from this value, non-zero index value. As you know, inside this non-zero index value, we are going to have the index value of these elements. So if I specify this right here, just like this, if I save the changes, then we are going to have the last two index values. So if I just print here I, save the changes, then you will notice here we have 3 and 4 index values. So what we need to do is we need to store 0 on third and fourth index. So if you count here 0, 1, 2, 3, we have to store here 0, and we also need to store here 0. So we start a loop from the third index and store 0 at the end of the array until its end. So I'm simply going to get rid of this console.log and say here number of I and specify 0 here. Now if I save the changes, you're not going to get anything because we need to console.log a number. So if I say here console.log number 1, save the changes, you can see we just converted this array and we have the result what we want. We have all the non-zero element at the front of the array and 0 element at the end of the array. Now you can also use while loop for this second pass. So if I comment this And if I say while, and inside this while, I'm going to say non-zero index if it is less than number dot length. And inside this while loop, I'm simply going to say numbers non-zero index plus plus is equal to 0. When I save the changes, then I'm going to have the same result using while loop. Now let's suppose that you want to simplify this code more. You don't want two loops. Then you can swap index values as well. So to simplify this code, you can remove a while loop and swap index values. So let me show you how you can simplify this code. You can solve this problem only with one for loop as well. Now, if you understand this code and this code makes you more comfortable, then you can stay with this code. Otherwise, you can simplify this code as well. Then you can remove one loop and add a logic in the same loop as well. You have to just swap the index values. So you can simplify this code and remove the while loop and swap index values. Let me show you how you can simplify this code. So let me get rid of this second pass, this second for loop right from here. And I'm going to first check if the number is not 0. If it is not 0, then I'm going to create here a temporary variable to store all the non-zero values. So here I'm going to say let temp is equal to numbers of non-zero index. We store all the non-zero values inside this temporary variable. And then I'm going to say here numbers of non-zero index. And then I'm going to specify here numbers of I. I'm going to just swap the values of this array. And then I'm going to say here numbers of I is equal to temp, this variable. Using this statement, I'm just going to swap the values of this array. And then at the end, we're going to say non-zero index. I'm going to increase that value and console.log number, just like this. When I save the changes, you can see we're going to have the result something like this. In the first iteration, we are going to swap the 0 and 1. Then on the second iteration, we are going to swap this 3 with 0. You can see we swap this third value. And on the third iteration, we are going to swap this 12 value. And at the end of the array, we are going to store all the 0 values. So using this statement, we are going to swap the values of the array. Let me explain this more. Let me comment this. And if I console.log here this number index just like this, when I save the changes, we're going to have 0 3 times because inside this array we have 3 non-zero values. Now just out of that, on the 0 index, I'm going to store this number of I value. So as you know, inside this number of I value, we have 1, 3 and 12. So I'm going to store that right here. So if I uncomment this and grab this console.log and paste that right here and print the same number index right down here, we are going to have here 1, 3 and 12 as a response. If I uncomment this, copy this console.log, paste it right down here and print this number of I right here, save the changes, then I'm going to have here 0, 1 and 3 as a response. So we're going to have this result 0, 1, 3 inside this number of I. So we are going to store this temporary variable to this number I. So after this, we are going to store all this value at the beginning of the array and store all the 0 values at the end of the array. So I'm just going to uncomment all this. Let me save this and we are going to have the result what we want. Now if you want, you can simplify this code as well, but that makes the code more unreadable and makes the code more advanced. If you understand this code, then that's completely fine. Just for now, I'm going to show you how you can convert this 4 line into 1. So you can efficiently swap all the values of the array in the single line. So let me get rid of this variable as well. We're not going to use this variable. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to first create here an array and I'm going to pass equal to an array, an empty array. So here I'm going to say number of non-zero index. Then I'm going to pass here a comma and say number of I. And I'm going to opposite this statement right here. I'm going to first call this number of I right here and then call this number of index right here. That's it. Now this statement is going to swap all the values of this array, and after this we have to just increase the value of the non-zero index just like this. Now do you know you can wrap this function on the single line as well. Let me show you how. Now, because we are not using for loop, we need some help from JavaScript functions. So let me get rid of this code right from here. And here I'm going to say console.log. And inside this filter, as you know, we have a callback function. So to this callback function, we say x as an argument, and then we pass x is not equal to 0. I'm going to just print the non-zero values just like this. So you can see we have array of non-zero values, and then we just need to store zeros at the end of this array. So just for now, just after the 0 here, I'm going to say dot length. Now we can get the length of this array using length property. So if I pass here dot and say length, then we can get the length of the array inside a console. Now what if we remove this length from the array? Then we get the remaining length of the array where we want to store all the zeros. So what if at the beginning, if I say numbers of length minus this value. So if I minus 3 from this number of length, we get the remaining index value of this array. Oops, I think I misspelled here. So we get 2 as a response. So we get the remaining length of the array where we are going to store all the zeros. If we convert this number into array, so let's suppose if I grab all the statement and if I call here array and we put the statement again, if I save the changes, we are going to get the empty array with 2 index values. The length of the array is 2. You can notice. And now, if I fill 0 inside this array, if I call here just after this length, we call here dot fill. If I call a method fill, and if I fill 0 inside this empty array, when I save the changes, you can see we are going to have 2 zeros inside this array. So now we can concatenate this array and get the result what we want. So what we are going to do is I'm going to grab this statement as it is, and here I'm going to say return numbers dot filter x is not equal to 0. Then I'm going to concat. So using this function, we are going to combine 2 arrays, and then I'm going to paste all that code again just as it is. You can see we paste all that code as it is. So we are going to concat this array, this non-zero array with this 0 array. And if I print console.log this number, oops, I misspelled something here, concat, it's concat. And if I console.log this, save the changes, you can see I'm going to have the result what I want. So if I console.log here some array, save the changes, then you will notice we are going to filter all the non-zeros value at the front of the array. You can see. And at the end of the array, we're going to store all the 0 values. So you can see we have the result what we want. You can follow and create this function however you like. That's upon you. So once you understand this, let's move to the next question. Now let's solve another interesting question. You are given a large integer represented as an integer array digit, where each digit of I is the ith digit of integer. The digits are ordered from most significant to least significant in left to right order. The large integer does not contain any leading zeros. Increment the large integer by 1 and return the resulting array of digits. Let me explain this question. It means, suppose if you have variable digit with array, this array represents the integer 1, 2, 3. If you increment this integer by 1, then you will get the result 1, 2, 4. As a result, the answer should be 1 to 4 inside an array. And suppose if we have digit 9 inside an array, so the large integer array represent the integer 9, incrementing by 1 gives you 10. As a result, the answer should be 1 and 0 inside an array. So let's solve this problem in JavaScript. To solve this problem, we need to create a function with parameter digit. So create here a function with a function name which is +1. You can specify any name to this function, that's upon you. And here we pass a parameter digits. Inside this function, we need to create a for loop to iterate through array. To iterate through array, we are using for loop. So we call here for let I is equal to 0 and I is less than or equal to digits dot length and I plus plus. we are going to increase the value of the I variable. And if I console.log digits of I, and if I call this plus 1 with an array just like 1, 2, and 3, save the changes, then we're going to have the result what we want. We're going to have 1, 2, 3 as a response here. Now, because we have here equal to sign, we get undefined here because currently this for loop is going to iterate 4 times. Let me just get it off this equal to sign, just like this. Now we get 1, 2, 3 as a response inside a console. So what we are going to do is, we are going to start from the rightmost digit, means from this third digit, and move towards the left side. So instead of doing this, I'm going to reverse the array because we insert 1 at the last. So first we need to reverse this array. So to reverse this array, you're simply going to first pass this digit length to this I variable. So this I start from the end of the array. So we call here digit length, just like this, and pass that. I'm going to change this condition. And here I'm going to say if I is greater than 0, then I'm going to minus this I variable, just like this. So now we have the reverse order of this array. Now you can notice we don't have 1 here because at starting we get undefined. We need to pass here equal to sign. When I save the changes, we are going to get here 1, but at the beginning we get undefined because currently the length of this for loop is 4. So it means this for loop iterate 4 times, but we have only 3 elements inside this array. We need to minus 1 from this digit length. So we just going to pass here minus 1. So we get the result what we want. So to solve this, we need to subtract 1 from the length of the digit, because if you count the digit length, then it is more than the array because the length starts from 1 and the array index starts from 0. So we need to subtract 1 from this array. Now just for that, we need to check that each digit is less than 9. If it is, we're simply going to increment it by 1 and return the entire array as we are done. So instead of this console.log here, we say if the digit of I, if it is less than 9, then I'm going to execute this if block, and then I'm going to say here digits of I plus plus, increase the value of the last index, and then console.log it. So if I console.log digits of I, when I say the changes, we are going to get the result what we want. We are going to increase these values of this array by 1. Now if we do this, you will notice that it will add 1 to every digit of the array. What we want is to add 1 only to the last digit of the array. We have already filtered the values less than 9, so we just need to add to the last digit. As you know, we already reversed this array, so we just need to add 1 to the first array index. So to do that, I'm simply going to get rid of this console.log, and here I'm going to return digit. So once we increase the value of this first index, I'm just going to exit from this for loop. So if I console.log this, save the changes, you can see I'm going to get the result of what I want. If I plus 1 to this array, we're going to get this result. But what if we have 9 at the end of the array? So let's suppose that we have here array 1 and 9. If I save the changes, we are going to get 2 and 9 as a response. If I add 1 to 19, we must need to have 20 as a response. We have 29 as a result, which is wrong. The correct answer is 20. To solve this problem, we need to add 0 at the end of the array and increase the first array element by 1. So as you know, this statement is going to increase the value of the first index by 1. You can notice. So if the digit is 9, then we need to set it to 0 and continue to the next iteration. So for that, here I'm going to say digit of I needs to be 0. So we are going to convert this 9 into 0 and continue this iteration and add 1 to this element. So this became 2 and we have 0 here instead of 9. So now if I save the changes, we get the result what we want. So when I add 1 to 19, we get 20 as a response. So this will solve the problem and return what we want. But this is not the end. As a programmers, we need to check all the possible user inputs and their results. So suppose the user enters all 9 digits. So let's suppose if the user enter 999. When I save the changes, you can see I'm going to get here undefined as a response. We need to get 1000 as a result from this function. If you console.log here, if you console.log digits, when you save the changes, then you notice here all the digits converted to 0. It means we have all 9 digits inside this parameter. So this statement is going to convert all 9 into 0. So what we have to do is we have to use unshift to add 1 at the beginning of the array and then return it. So just after this for loop here, I'm going to say digit dot unshift. And if I add here 1, so this statement is going to add 1 at the beginning of the array. And if I return digits, then we might get the result what we want. We get the result what we want. We are just going to add 1 at the beginning of this array. And now if we check any possible values, now if you add 9 here few more times, then you get the result of what you want. You can now test any possible numbers and you will get the correct answer. So if I copy and paste some possible values here, just like this, then you will get the result of what you want. Now, if you want, you can condense the if statement to a single line. Instead of checking the I is less than 9 and then incrementing, we directly use the pre-increment operator. So instead of this if statement here, what we are going to do is we say here if we use pre-increment operator to digits, and then here we pass digit of I, and then I'm going to say if it is less than 10. Now because we use your pre-increment operator, we need to increase the value of this number to 10, and then here we return digits. That's it. Now we can get rid of this if statement. When I save the changes, you're going to get the same result. Now you can simplify this more and improve your coding skill. If you replace this statement with tilde I, then both statements are equal. Let's check this out. If I save the changes, you're going to get the same result. So if you replace I less than equal to 0 with tilde I, then both statements are equal. This bitwise not operator inverts all bits in the number and then add 1. So for any non-negative integer, this results in a truth value. Practice with this code and understand the logic behind this question. Now let's move on and address the next question. Length of the last word. Given a string consisting of a word and spaces, return a length of the last word in the string. The word is maximal substring consisting of non-space characters only. Do not use trim, split, and pop method. Now let me explain this function. Now suppose that you have a string, the output of the function should be 3 because if you count the length of the last word, then it should be 3. If the string is A and Z, the result should be 1 because we count the last word length. Let's solve this problem first with trim, split, and pop method to understand how this works. So let's first create a function called length of last word. As a parameter, you need to pass here a string. So we pass here s as a parameter. Now let me just console.log and say s.trim. Now this trim function is going to remove leading and trailing white spaces from the string. So if I say here length of last word, and if I specify here a space b c d, let me save the changes, then this function is going to remove leading and trailing white spaces. Now once we trim the leading and trailing white spaces, we can separate this word using split method. So we call here dot, and we're going to split this word with the space. So as you know, we have here a space, so we split this word right from here. So we pass here a space, save the changes. You can see we have an array. Now let's use a pop method to get last word in the array. So if I call here dot pop, just like this, then this is just going to return this last array element, just like this. And now if you call here dot length. So with just a one single line of code, you can get the result what you want. But in the question, we are not allowed to use trim, split, and pop method. So let's solve this problem with just a for loop. So let's calculate the length of the last word in a given string without using trim, split, and pop method. So let me get rid of this console.log, and here we create a variable length is equal to 0. Then we say let inward is equal to false. So we initialize the length to keep track of the length of the last word, and we create here inward to determine if we are currently within a word. So once we add this variable, we loop through the string from the end to the beginning because we are counting the length of the last word. So instead of from the start, we are going to start the loop right from the back. So here we say for let I is equal to s dot length, and we minus 1 right from the length. Then we say I is greater than equal to 0 and I minus minus. So we are going to just console.log here s of I. So you will notice, so we are going to just iterate through this word right from the back. Now once we reverse this for loop, let me find the spaces. So to find the space, I'm going to simply say here if s of I, if it is not equal to space, then I'm going to console.log it. So I'm going to grab this console and paste it here. When I say the changes, this is going to remove the space right from this word. So now inside this if statement, we can change the value of this inward because currently we are within the word. So we can say here inward is equal to true. Just out of that, so we call length plus plus, we increase the value of the length and console dot log the length. So now you can see we have 1, 2, 3 and 4 as a response. Now because the length of the word is 4, we get the 4 in the console. We need to break the loop when we have space between two words because we need only the length of the last word. So what we can do is, if there is a space, we are going to call here else statement. So we call here else if inward and we say here break. If I save the changes, you can see we're only going to have 3 as a response. So now what we have done here is, when we have space inside this word, we are going to break this for loop. So when we have this space, we are going to break this for loop and exit from this statement. So that is why we have 3 as a response. So now if I get rid of this console.log and out of this for loop right here, if I return length and if I console.log this statement just like this, then we have the result what we want. We get 3 as a response. So this is very simple, right? To get the last word length as a response. If I increase this first word length just like this, you will get the same result. If you increase the character of this last word, you will get 4 as a response. Now, if you want, you can simplify this code and remove this inwards variable right from this code. This variable is used only to check that we are inside a word or not. So what we can do is, we can get rid of this inward right from here and change this for loop a little bit. We are going to start this for loop right behind this string as it is, and then here just after this statement, as you know, instead of this I greater than equal to 0, we can use here tilde operator tilde I just like this, and then we can see here and if s of I is not equal to a space. So we call this condition, this one, or the length is equal to 0. If anything is true, then execute this for loop. So now I'm going to wrap this if statement inside this for loop just like this and get rid of this if statement right from here. And here I'm going to say if s of I is not equal to a space, then increase the length of this variable, this one. That's it. Now when I save the changes, I'm going to get the same result. You can notice this is a much simpler approach to solve this problem. That's about you. You can follow any method you want to solve this problem. Now let's solve one more interesting question. Given an integer array, number, return true if any value appears at least twice in the array, and return false if every element is distinct. Let me explain this question. So if we have a number array, we must ensure that any value in the array is appear at least twice. If there are two or more duplicate elements, we are going to return true, otherwise we return false. So if there are no duplicates, we return false. So let's implement this code and solve this problem. So we start by creating a function and name this function contains duplicate. And then we say here number, and inside this function, we create a constant variable object just like this. This object will use to keep track of numbers we have seen. So we create here a constant variable object, and then we say here for loop for a let number of nums, and then we console.log a number. I call this contains duplicate with an array. Then we're going to have all the array elements inside a console as it is with this for loop. Now if I print this object, then I'm gonna get an empty object as a response. This will print obj object 4 times because the argument array has 4 values. Now if I print this object with a key number, I will get 4 undefined. So if I pass here num just like this, so we're going to pass this value as a key to this object. When I save the changes, we get 4 undefined. This is because we don't have any value inside this object. So what if I store something inside this object? So if I say here object of number is equal to true, so I'm going to just store value inside these keys of this object. So we create all these key inside this object and store true inside it. So if I get rid of this console and print it here, object, save the changes, you're just going to have 3 values inside this object. Now you have 4 values inside this array, but you have only 3 values inside this object. You might ask, why don't we have 4 true values inside this console? If you look at closely, you will notice that we are going to store true values as an array keys. This means that we will use the argument array number as the key and store true value in it. When we save the same key in the object, it will replace the previous value. Object is not going to create a duplicate key. Instead, it will replace the previous value. So this first value is going to replace twice. Now we need to see if the same property exists in the object. If we have it, we exit the loop and return false, indicates that we have a duplicate value in the array. To determine whether there is a duplicate value, we must examine the object properties. So if we have already set the property and then we need to set it again, we can say that the object contains duplicate key or number. So suppose if I add here if object of number, if it is not equal to undefined, then we are going to say console.log duplicate. Let me save the changes and show you the result first. So you can see this statement is now execute 4 times. Now these both statements are saying that every time the object key is not undefined, execute the console.log. As you know, we set true to all the keys, which is why we have duplicate context text 4 times, because we don't have any undefined value. Now if you move this statement up, then we will get what we want. So let's suppose that if I copy this statement and paste it up here, then you'll notice we have this console.log only once. So when the value is duplicated, this will only print once. To determine when this duplicate prints occurs, use the index value. Let me show you the index value. So if I change this for loop a little bit, if I add here an array and say index and number, and then I'm going to say numbers dot entries just like this. And instead of this duplicate, if I print here index value of the current array, save the changes, then you'll notice on index 3, we have a duplicate array. If we count this array 0, 1, 2, 3, you will get 3 as a response inside this array. This means you have a duplicate array right inside your argument. So using this statement, we can say that we have a duplicate element inside an array. Now that we know that there is a duplicate value on the third index, we can return the value, otherwise return false. Let me get rid of this statement just like this. And instead of console.log, now I'm going to say return true. Let me get rid of this console.log, and here I can say return false. Let me save the changes, and then I'm going to say console.log, save the changes. I'm going to have true as a response. And if we don't have a duplicate value inside an array, we can return false. Save the changes. Now we have true because we have a duplicate value inside this array. If I get rid of this one right from here, we get false as a response. We can simplify this if statement further. Instead of this not equal to undefined, just get rid of this statement right from here. Save the changes. You will get the same result. If I copy and paste it here, just like this, you will get the result of what you want. And now you can simplify this statement more and wrap this loop statement in a single line as well. So let's suppose that if I create here another for loop to wrap this for loop in a single line, if I say here for let number of nums, if number in object, if we have a number in object, then we are going to return true, else return the object of number is equal to 1. And then I'm going to return false as a response. Let me get rid of this statement, save the changes. You can see we're going to get the same result. We're going to first iterate over the numbers, and then I'm going to say if the number is in this object, we're going to return true. Otherwise, I'm going to return 1 inside this object. Alternatively, you can make this statement more concise with some JavaScript methods. So instead of this statement, you can simply say return numbers dot sum, and inside this sum function, we say numbers dot index of number if it is not equal to numbers of last index of number. Now let me save the changes. You can see we're going to get the same result. We are just using the JavaScript methods to solve this problem. So there are different ways you can solve this problem. This function uses the sum method to check if any element in the array has a duplicate. The index of and index last of method used to check if the element appears more than once in the array. So I hope you understand how you can solve this problem with different approach. If you want more video like this, check out this video.